Dayanita Singh is a bookmaker working with photography. She was born in Delhi. She studied visual communication at NID, Ahmedabad, and later at the International Center for Photography in New York. She has published about 10 books till now. Dayanita.
Thank you. I can't believe that on a Sunday afternoon so many people have nothing better to do. And I'm still expecting more people. So if any of you are slightly inclined, it would help if some people went for a walk or something. I'm going to start this talk. I have a title for the talk, and I'd like to explain the title. 20 years ago, there was a similar forum being created for photography, and it was all boys at that time. And someone suggested to the group that, there's this Dayanita Singh, and rumor has it, he denies it, but Pablo said, "Who's Dayanita Singh?" So I thought I would dedicate this talk to my beloved colleague Pablo, who most times I am not in conversation with and fight with fiercely, but the talk is dedicated to him. So, the answer to that question, who is Dayanita Singh? Please bear with me because I know I run the risk of being called arrogant and conceited, and some of which I am, but this is not the spirit in which I say the title of this talk. I say it in all humility because really all I can share with you is the influences and the experiences that have shaped who I am today, and what my work is. It's all to do with people in my life, with the experiences that I've had. Very little to do with photography per se. And maybe it's a good thing to say right in the beginning that I think on one hand, this is a great moment for photography because photography has finally become what it set out to be, a truly universal democratic medium, and everyone that has a mobile phone has access to photography. So what is it to be a photographer? I think yesterday the gentleman in the red kurta who was inaugurating the whole festival spoke about we're all photographers. And it's absolutely right. Because if I look at the crowds here, if I look at the range of people here, there was a gentleman outside who said, the definition of the photographer is completely different now, and he was absolutely right. So where does all this leave what is the notion of the photographer then? I think a photographer now is no more than someone collecting, as though in literature, collecting words to build a vocabulary. So you're collecting all these images as though in an image bank. There's no shortage of images being created. My question is, what do you do with those images? Can you even write a sentence with them? Could you think of a poem perhaps? A biography? Reportage? Fiction? Could you do something with that work to push not just the medium of photography, but also how we understand photography? So, with that provocative statement, I'm going to run you through some of the influences in my life through the books that I've made. For those of you who've attended a bookmaking talk of mine earlier at Nature Mart, don't worry, this is not a book talk about book design. But I feel that my work is best, it's really about the book. So I don't feel the need to show single images, but I'll show you book pages and talk about the influences. The first influence that I was literally born into is the person that I had dedicated one of the grants to last night, Noni Singh, who photographed in a way that is something interesting for us to consider now, which was photographing for herself, because she wanted to record the dress she had stitched for her child's birthday, some fancy dress, some fantasy of hers. This was not work being made to be shared with anybody. It was just put into a family album like the one you see on the screen, and maybe it was placed on tabletops with glass on top. So that is the kind of influence that I first had from photography, the family album. So it's not such a surprise that I find the book as my form now, because that's all that I was surrounded with. Each child, a fat family album, every occasion put into albums. It wasn't just the making of the pictures, it was the sequencing, it was the language that was used to describe them, if at all, and the way they were categorized. An example of that, of the Noni Singh idea of making an archive. Girlfriends till he married Noni, hope so. All these photos had been carelessly thrown in a box. Hey, some respect for photography at least. I can think of 100 photographers that I could say to exactly these words. All these photos had been carelessly thrown in a box. Hey, some respect for photography at least. What's the form you're going to give all those photos? So these are photographs that Noni Singh found when she married her husband, of different women that her Casanova husband had befriended. And she put them in an album. On some of the pages, it's the same woman, like this one. So she's collected all her photos and it's like a tribute to this person. Behind some of these photos are comments like, oh, he would have been happier if he had married her because she is so unhappy with the Greek ambassador, I think it was. So when you turn the photos, and unfortunately I don't have that scan here, there's another history going on. So this is lovely Pankaj from Bangladesh. I wish Shahidul was here. I think she was the closest that he came to marrying, but it was too close to partition, and the idea of a good Sardarji marrying somebody from Bangladesh was problematic. So there's Pankaj clutched in his arms. So this is Noni Singh's album. And on the last page, she had put her own photograph, I think with the understanding that she may be the last, and she probably was. To the gathering here, I would like to say that this is a resource that in some way or the other, we all have in our homes, in our neighbors' homes. And I think the great history of Indian photography, if there is such a thing, it's a problematic category, but a great history, a great exhibition waiting to be done, great research waiting to be done, is in the family album. Precisely because it was, Devika, can you come here? Because the family album, if you just use Noni Singh's album as an example, is complete fantasy. Yes, there's certain reality in the photographs, but she has sort of made her own kind of narrative out of it. So I would urge you, for those of you wanting to study photography, to look into the family albums, to see if there's something for you to do there, and a great source of inspiration. I noticed that there are some people here doing exhibitions with poses. Great way to study how people want to be photographed, how they are asked to be photographed, and what are the poses they strike in their most private spaces because they think that these photos are not going to be seen by anybody else. I think the other great influence in my life has been the musician Zakir Hussain. I discovered photography through him, really. I won't go into that story now, but all the years that I studied graphic design at NID, Zakir was really my mentor, and what I learned from him was that single-minded focus, that obsession with what one did, where one didn't get diverted. So even though I could have had lessons from Hariji, it was Zakir who would rein me in and say, stick to your photography, focus on what you do, don't start learning flute as well now, because you will always have distractions, and really think of your craft. Now, I'm sure many of you are familiar that in Indian classical music there is something called chilla, where for 40 days you're locked inside a room and you just practice. Food is given to you through the door. You don't go out, you don't speak to anyone, you just practice. I saw how Zakir lived with his art all the time. Even though he was in the most engaging conversation, he was still trying to work out some deviation in the beat that he was going to play in the evening. He was never separated from his music. And yet I also learned from him how to deal with people, because he traveled so much. I traveled with him and a lot of other musicians. And I think I learned a very important lesson there. Again, at the risk of sounding old-fashioned, I would say to you that very important lesson that I learned from the musicians was about the Guru Shishya Parampara, and how one lives with a mentor, and how one listens to a mentor, and how one gains so much from being around somebody, not necessarily always teaching you your tabla or whatever the thing may be, but just in the way that they lead their lives. And I still do that. I still have 4 or 5 mentors, and I will still drop everything in the world to travel with them, because I know that I learned so much in those 3 or 4 days, and I will come to that again in Center Letter. So this is a book I made while I was a student at NID, Optima typeface, sponge-filled cover, with no idea of what book design was about. So sort of made it up myself. How does one handle text in a book? Do I want to crop? Do I not want to crop? Text, how am I going to write text? Let me do interviews. So I became the interviewer as well. Followed Zakir as much as I could. So I was known as a visiting student at NID. And then, now when I look at this work, for many years I didn't want to even list it on my CV because I was so embarrassed by it. But now when I look at it, I realize there were so many different ways that I could have taken this work. For example, what you see on the screen, Zakir actually writing to the photographs. And now, if I had to do this book again, I might actually ask him to write on all the photographs. It would be such an engaging book to have his point of view, because he would often complain how I was always using him as the subject. I love this. When my guru went to his guru, they both put their hands on the tabla. They were exactly the same, exclamation mark. For me, a dream come true. I could have never imagined text like that from anywhere else other than him. Going into these details, because then it follows through in my next work 10 years later. So I think the Zakir book had sowed the seeds. So we have the family album, we have the Zakir book, where I'm trying to sort of build up my own repertoire of experiences that I could bring to bookmaking. And here's another one, Zakir's diary, that he would write himself in his own handwriting. And I could have made the whole book like this, because each photograph could have been had one of these pages next to it. I mean, when one starts to make the book, there are so many other things that present themselves, And this is if you're interested in the book as a form. But if you think that you can just make a group of photos and send it to your photo editor or the designer, then we get the books that there's a sameness to them. So for myself, I found, and I guess from quite early on, that the book is my form, that the exhibition is really a catalogue of my work. The exhibition is a catalogue of all the images in the book. And the book is something else. This book is something more than all those images. When I was a student at NID, I had just been introduced to Robert Frank, who I still think is the, in my opinion, the greatest photographer. And for all of you starting photography, I would say, just try to go to Photo Inc. has Steidelville, which has a lot of the Robert Frank books, and Steidel has republished all of Robert Frank books. He was also a bookmaker. So I urge you all to look in that direction. I took this advice a little too seriously, and I thought I couldn't be a photographer if I didn't have this book. So I went in one winter morning into the bookshop at ICP in a big black coat with my friend Michael, and put the book into my coat and walked out because I thought I couldn't be a photographer without this book. That there was something in it that nothing else could make up for. So I had to have the book, but I didn't have $40, and I stole the book. I was not in a habit of stealing, and I don't think I've stolen since then. However, in '96, when I was struggling with how to make these family portraits because I wanted to give them to people, I had a call saying Robert Frank has a grant. He would like to give me money to continue the family portraits work because he understands nobody else would fund such a thing. I couldn't believe it. At first I thought it was a joke, and then I thought, oh, he's going to try and steal my whole archive. My life's work will belong to him. So I rang up and said, what's the deal? What does he want in exchange? Because I can't commit my whole life's work to him, only because I'm photographing families. So I can't sort of say that work is all going to become part of Robert Frank's archive. The message from Robert Frank was, tell her to throw it in the sea if she doesn't want the money. It's for her to do whatever she wants. And that made me realize, and the way I stretched that grant for 2 years made me realize how crucial it is to have these grants, especially in a medium like photography, maybe in all mediums, but certainly in photography, where often, or in the days of film at least, it had so much to do with just having the money to buy the film. And I remember people taking me to, if even Zakir sometimes, to the Machan, to the coffee shop, and for the cost of that sandwich, the club sandwich, I would calculate that I could have bought 3 rolls of Tri-X and never quite was able to say to people, look, I won't eat, but you give me the money so I can buy the film. And it continued like this till 5 years ago, where one had to really think about the film. So last night, it's a small gesture, but I thought there may be other people who are working with film who find it difficult, and that's how the grant happened, and that's the long Robert Frank story. But great photographer, great bookmaker. Really urge you to look at all his work, especially the book storylines. After NID, there was a few years spent with photojournalism. I think, on one hand, I would say my design training at NID, and then the experiences that photojournalism forced me into really became the substance of what I made later. Having suddenly to go off to Manipur, to go to Chennai, to photograph in a TB hospital, whatever it was, you just had to go and do the story, do your research, and you had to come back with some pictures. For a long time, I thought my time at NID was a waste because I should have been able to just go to photo school. Then I thought, why did I spend so much time on photojournalism? And today, I really wish I had continued longer with the photojournalism, because it really established the core. Design on one hand, photojournalism on the other. And of course, it was through one of those assignments that I met Mona Ahmed. I've only reached 3. Yeah, no question. Yeah. Pablo has written here for me to read. It says, don't finger. And I disagree with him, because I think in photography, it's really important to finger, to challenge, to push, to question, to argue, to fight. Fight the medium. So, my work with Mona was often just, it stretched over 13 years. There was a grant last night in her name, and I read out the beautiful poem she had written for Vidur. The work with Mona was essentially about finishing rolls of film when I would come back from assignment. So the whole book has been shot on some 100 rolls of film, and that's why I'm very attached to this 100 rolls of film. Well, it's just a number now for the grant, but at that time, it was 8 shots, maybe 12 shots. Just to finish the film, I would go hang out with Mona. We would lie in bed, talk about love, about sex, about men. And then we would go out on the street and we would become like man and woman, and she would be very much the protector and get very angry and fight with people who would stop me from photographing in Turkman Gate. The story with the Mona book, I think, is very legendary, but at the risk of repeating myself, and for all of you who heard me before on it, excuse me, but I had been making this work with Mona over the years. She never wanted it published, and when I went to meet Walter Keller in 1999, because he was interested in making a book that went from my photojournalism work to the family portraits and empty spaces, I showed him this work and I said, well, this is someone I've been photographing for many years, but I'm not sure if she would ever let me publish it, but I'd like you to see it. So he said, this is amazing. We don't often see work over such a long period with one person, and this is the book we're going to make. Forget that retrospective-like book, that can come later. So I said, I don't know, but who'll write the text and what do we do? He said, first you ask her if she's agreeable. So I sent her a fax through my mother. Mona by that time was living in a graveyard, and the fax said, the world's best publisher would like to make a book on your unique self. Do you agree? She sent a fax back through my mother saying, whole world calls me eunuch, you call me unique. First you tell me which is true, then I will answer you. Luckily that came on Walter's table, and he said, this is it, she's going to write the text for the book. And that's when my prejudices came out, and I said, Walter, you've never stepped out of the white world. You don't know what it means to be a eunuch in India, to be thrown out from the eunuchs community, to be an outcast among the outcasts. How can she write the text? And he said, just trust me, I know what I'm doing, I've been around long enough. And I trusted him, and this is the book we made. Mona's helped with the editing, she wrote the captions, and she wrote the text in the form of emails to Walter Keller. And finally, when I saw the dummy that Hans Werner, the designer, had proposed, I must say I was a little disappointed, because the photos were really small, the captions were really big, and even though we had discussed that this is not a book about photography, that it's much, much, much more than that, and it's more likely biography and trying to point to certain holes in society, the dark areas in society, I called Walter and I said, I don't know if it's too late, but I think it's really unfair to the pictures that they're so small. He said, trust me, Dayanita, this is going to become, he said, a classic. And then Scala went bankrupt, so I'm not sure if it becomes a classic or not. But because of this format that was dictated by Mona had said, let's make a book that you can read on a plane or a train. And so the format is small, so you could carry it with you and you could read it. And I just met some people today who, in one of the workshops, have read the book today. I think working with Mona was a lot about very long conversations, not just about love and sex and all of that, but also about how exploitative this medium is. Mona would often tell me, तुम तो मुझे पुअर लोगों के कैमरा से शूट करती हो और अमीर लोगों का फैमिली पोर्ट्रेट हासिलदार से लेती हो. I was shooting her with 35 and medium format was for the family portraits. And she's an amazing person. She somehow would point to things in photography, just like that note she wrote for Vidur yesterday. ये बचपन चला जाएगा लेकिन हम तस्वीरों में जिंदा रहेंगे. There was a lot that I learned from her. So there was the learning from Zakir, and then came this deep learning from Mona about photography and about life. Again, I would say it's a very beautiful story, full of contradictions, full of lies, as one's life story is. You forget and then you embellish and things change, and Walter left it exactly like that. He didn't edit it. Then Scala went bankrupt and I met Gerhard Steidl, this great publisher, who said, I printed your Mona book, but next time you make a book, I want you on press. And if your publisher can't afford it, then I will pay for it. But you don't make books without being on press. Get that clear. So I said, oh, yes, sir. Cut to Berlin. Finally, someone wanted to show my family portraits and empty spaces. Catalog had to be made for privacy at the Hamburger Bahnhof Museum. And they said, what do we do? Who's going to publish this book? Can you think of someone in India? And I said, well, let's ask Steidl. They said, you don't ask Steidl for someone who's just starting out. Steidl said, come and see me. He looked at the work. He said, sure, I do it, and told the curator to leave. And then sat me down with photocopies of the work, scissors, scotch tape, and said, make the book. And I said, I don't know how to make a book. He said, first of all, you tell me, you want a catalog or you want an artist book? And I said, what is the difference? It's a book of photos. And he said, no, Dayanita, this is not how we work here. You want to make an artist book, then you have to be involved in each decision, including the end paper and the binding thread and the color of it, and of course the font and the layout, and you have to conceive the whole book. Catalog, you leave it to us, and that's really boring, that's what everybody does. So his way of introducing me to the idea of bookmaking was really to give me photocopies of all the works and these scotch tape, because he said the problem with book design today is it's all done on the computer, and at the end of it, you have a physical object. So when your book comes from press and you feel it for the first time, you're not quite sure how it's going to work out or whether it has worked out the way you wanted it, because you never actually worked with the paper till you got the finished product at the end. I think he gave me a very important lesson in that, and now I make books all the time, regardless of whether anybody wants to publish them or not. We made a decision on how to separate the text. I was finding the relationship with text problematic, but since it was a museum show, it had to have text, and so we made the decision to print the text on different paper, so it would be very clear that it was not quite my intention, that somehow it was forced. So these are the kind of decisions that went into making privacy, and then introducing the empty spaces work into it. And when Gerhard first said, make the sequence, I made it by city, because this was 91, and my understanding was that work happens in Calcutta, and work happens in Bombay, and work happens in Delhi, and that's how it needs to be put out. And he said, no, just let's mix it all up. He actually flung all my images into the air and said, now let's do it again. And then we started to think of it as little sonnets with little pauses, what to start with. Do we want to go straight into the subject? Do we want to create some little drama? We made a little section with people and their dogs, worked a lot on the sequence. And today I can say to you safely that making images is maybe 10% of my work. And the rest of it is really weeding, editing, then the sequencing. After the sequencing comes the pacing and thinking about the form, on what kind of an object I want to create out of this work. What do I want that object to do? Is it just a book of photos? Of course not, because I'm now beginning to think that this is my work. Making the book is my work, and the photographs is just a way to make the book. I was in Boston at the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum, had been photographing chairs, and because I had been photographing families before and empty spaces, I started to read genders into chairs and personalities, and there was the ballerina chair, and there was the grandfather chair, and I was enjoying engaging with chairs, really as I did with the family portraits. So at that time I was in Boston and I had some contact sheets with me from my Calcutta shooting that I had just done. And I was feeling a little restless because I wasn't quite making something with my hands. So I went and found these Japanese moleskin books, the accordion fold books, started to cut those contact sheets and put them all together, made a sequence out of it for a writer friend that I wanted to say thank you to and who was from Calcutta. So I knew that it was a nicer way to engage with him than to just write a letter of admiration, or I thought this is the way that I can address him. And this became my form for many years. Went to Steidl again to publish the book, and the museum said this is an artist's book. And I said if it's an artist's book, I would like to bring some of the elements that have become quite prominent in my work into the conversation, which is the idea of the gift and the idea of dissemination. So we decided to make it in the same accordion fold book because the curator had seen my work for the Calcutta friend and said, why don't we try this format? And I thought Steidl wouldn't agree, and of course he loved it. And then came the idea, again the museum wanted the text and all the acknowledgements. Again I thought, how does it matter where this photo was made? You know, what does it satisfy other than your curiosity, whether it was made in Morvi or it was made in Madrid? Somehow began to feel that the where and the when of photography was getting in the way of people experiencing the image. It's even now people say, oh, where did you take this picture? Maybe it's a way to start the conversation, but give the picture a chance to do something more than just give you information. And you know, in this age of information especially, there's an overload. So do I want to add that to my pictures? No. So this time, instead of just printing the text on a different paper, we printed it as a loose sheet. And so of course it flies away and gets lost. The idea of the gift and the dissemination, two key words in my language certainly. Each of these, so 1,000 copies were printed, 500 were given to the museum for their requirement of trustees and giving the books to their bookshop. The rest 500 were distributed worldwide by a network of friends. Each friend was given 10 books each, and the edition was not, I mean, as you see here, it's not really about my name or Steidl's name. You can barely, you have to sort of touch the surface of the black cover to see my name. It wasn't about my name, but the edition became of the person I had given it to for distribution. So if it was Prabhudo Das Gupta, then it would say PDG 1 of 10, PDG 2 of 10, and then he would have to decide how he distributed those books, and he didn't have to tell me. So a curator in Birmingham said, this is too elitist. I am going to give the books to the first 10 people I meet today. Bus conductor, museum guard, secretary, bookshop person, mega curator, some artist, the installation team. So he finished it in one day, kept one for himself. A writer friend said, this is too precious, I'm not going to give it to anyone, I'm going to keep it locked in my study, I'll display it in my house. If somebody has appreciated it more than 5 times, then they get a copy. So everyone found different ways of distributing the work. And it was going to people with no commerce attached. There was no money. It was just a question of knowing, for example, PDG, and if PDG thought that you were relevant to this exercise, then he gave you the book. And finally, I went to meet Saul Levitt a few years ago in Hartford, Connecticut. Great bookmaker, great bookmaker. And I thought, what do I take for him? So from my edition of 10, I took a chair's book to him. And he laughed and said, you can keep it, Dayanita. I have 3 already. So that just proved to me that, yes, this is where I want to take photography. It is, after all, a medium of reproduction. And, you know, the whole idea of what is the original is also now questionable to me. For example, the print used to be the original because that was the starting. So we would say the print is the original. Even then I would think actually the negative is the original. But now, what if I said to you that there are no prints of this chair's work? That the only way you see it is in the book. And I've just chosen that instead of silver gelatine prints, I'm making offset prints. And that's my original. Because photography is about reproduction. So that is a case I'm trying to build up. It's difficult financially to pull that across, but to pull that off, but maybe one will be able to do that, because I really feel the book is my form, and the exhibition is something that I'm slightly forced into doing, because of the market, because of the way galleries are, and of course I need to earn a living as well. We'll come to that later. So from chairs, moving away from giving descriptions of places, also getting a little tired of the idea of the project, that I'm making family portraits, that I'm making chair portraits, I'm photographing empty spaces. And because that's not how life was happening, and there were other things going on the side that I was also photographing, but I was not paying attention to them because they were not part of the project I had taken on. So I was in Calcutta, and this is someone I've been photographing since she was 3, and I made that photograph, and I call it now the poppy moment, because I recognized myself in it, but there was a push and a pull. It was a go away closer moment, as I called it. And then I thought, there are lots and lots of photographs that I have made with this emotion, that have this emotion running through them. And could one perhaps think of making a book where the editing was done based on an emotion rather than on the project? So that's how Go Away Closer came together. Again, went to Steidl. I won't get into the design aspects of it, but we worked very, very hard on the sequencing of it, and went back to his and my love for classical music, and how we would build up the tenor of the piece, and where we would stop it, because that's the other thing I learned from music, is restraint, knowing when to stop, withholding. And by this time I was reading a lot of Michael Ondaatje, who is also who is a great master of editing. For me, if you want to learn editing, for me, and everything I'm saying is for me, it's not trying to give you any formulas, but there is more editing to be learned from literature and cinema, but poetry, because often we try to condense a whole experience into a few images. And to me, the greatest way of studying that is Vikram Seth's All You Who Sleep Tonight. And for anyone who's interested, actually there'll be something at the end, so you'll get the list. I don't need to go into that now. Just to say that by this time, it was of course the conversations. I was carrying with me the training in design and classical music, but by now I had realized the gold mine that there was for me in literature, because I was getting tired of photography in itself. And I knew I wanted to push myself. I wanted to push the conversation in photography. And it wasn't about looking at other photographers' work. It was about trying to do something with each project of mine to try and push the conversation that was going on that I was aware of. I didn't know what was everything that was happening in the world, certainly, but I wanted to push it. And Gerhard became a great accomplice in this because he also was tired of making the big tomb book and really appreciated these little projects that I would come to him with. This is my kitchen in Delhi, and these are the little black books. By this time, this is 2008, I had made 32 of these black moleskin books. 2 copies were made, one was sent to the friend that it was made for, and the other one remained with me in my kitchen museum. And I thought, one day I'll put them all in a shoebox and go somewhere and have an exhibition with these, opening out these books. And my friends had them, so if I wanted to, I could also just call in all those books, but we had 2 copies. So 2 handmade copies, one with me, one with a friend. Then I go to Calcutta with Gerhard and make a similar kind of book for him. And he thinks it's absolutely amazing when I give it to him as a thank you. This was often a thank you to the great minds that I had the great fortune to travel with. And I learned so much from the friends that I made these journeys with. Even now, I think if some of them said to me, will you come and just translate for me, I would happily do that, because it just gives me a way into seeing how their mind works. So Gerhard said, we must publish these little books that you keep making. This is often how I travel, with these little boxes and contact sheets cut up, because I don't know when I would want to make a book that maybe puts together rooms full of people sitting on a Sunday afternoon, or that's just one image I want to put into a larger fiction story. I'm very interested in fiction now. So this is how I travel, in this kind of box or this kind of box with all these little prints. The box was produced in India and shipped empty to Germany with this poem on it to suggest to you that you're not the intended recipient, that somehow this has reached you by accident. And then there was the idea of what do we want to cover the box with, just to give you an idea of how Gerhard works. And I said, oh, it would be wonderful if it's fabric and something you can hold in your hand that is very physical. And remember, studying at NID, I was also exposed to textile and product design. So the idea of making this box full of my books, becoming a little, like a miniature museum really, like a, well, not a museum, an archive. I wanted the cloth also to suggest something. So we use the white fabric that is used when we send parcels through the post in India. Now, most people would not realize that. Most people said, why have you made it white? It gets so dirty. But in the Steigl way of thinking, and I think in bookmaking, all these little things really add up to something. So Center Letter has had, I think, more viewership, more appreciation than any of my work. It was shown at the Arles Photo Festival first. That was very significant for me, because in a photo festival, to show a mass-produced thing, unlimited, not a limited edition, to show a book as my work was, I thought, now I've achieved something. At Arles, then I was in Calcutta, walking on Park Street, saw this wonderful jewelry store. The vitrines were empty, went inside, introduced myself. Luckily, the person knew my work. He said, I'm a fan of your work. What can I do for you? I said, give me your vitrines. He said, with great pleasure. Our jewelry is too expensive to put in these windows. So please put your work in. This was January 2008. I was there 2 months ago. It's still in the vitrine. So it's 3 years. Center Letter is on display. The Panwala next door has taken on being the guide to the show, telling people ये नेहरू जी का घर है इलाहाबाद में, और ये बम्बई की तस्वीरें हैं, and all of that, ये किसी और की तस्वीरें हैं, पर इसमें फोटोग्राफर की अपनी तस्वीर, all that. And there are 3 bigger sisters there. If you go to Park Street, you can't miss the 3 bigger sisters, and they hang around here. So in terms of footfalls and getting your work to another audience, reaching a larger audience, I don't think there's any museum show that can compare with the footfalls that Park Street has. And even if 1% of the people look at the work, I mean, just do a calculation of what it means in 3 years and how many people possibly walk on Park Street, what that 1% is. So I spoke earlier about the idea of the gift and the idea of the dissemination, and then finding these new ways of disseminating the work has become more and more important to me. I have a little surprise at the end of the show, which you will see. So then I would go say to Ganges View Hotel in Bangalore, and Shashank would say, tum kaam nahi lai, kuch to dikhao, koi projection karo. And I pull out this box, and on every table I have a little exhibition going on. And somebody would pick up one, and it was lovely, and it was fine because I could buy another one. It's not some precious object that needs to be insured, and it's a big deal if somebody has stolen one. I thought it was quite a compliment. Then it was even shown at the Basel Art Fair as art, this mass-produced book. And this was the first time we didn't think enough about the display, I have to say. And then there was the big photography show that Devika had curated at NGMA in Bombay. And somehow I wanted on the CV of Sent a Letter to be able to put that it has been shown at NGMA, and that's what happened. This is NGMA, Sent a Letter on top. Pablo Bartholomew's work below. This is Sent a Letter, I think in its most beautiful installation, at the Photo Museum in Winterthur, where they built this wall with these niches for the books. I was so happy to see this. And I realized that people were recognizing something in this little project that I did for myself and for a few friends, like the family albums that Noni Singh made. It was something very private, and somehow when that came into the public domain, it's not for me to say what people recognize and Sent a Letter, but certainly it has reached a, there's a, I don't know whether to make that announcement just now, but I will. Fiden is making a book on 25 years of contemporary art in the world, and the 200 artworks that have shaped contemporary art. And Sent a Letter is one of those 200 artworks. Along with Jeff Koons' Bunny. I mean, look at just the material side of it. This box that costs 2,500 or 3,000 rupees, available at Photo Inc. for any of you who want to buy it. I think it's, well, I feel, anyway, won't get into that. So there it is. Sent a Letter, a mass-produced book, is now considered an artwork, considered an artwork. Well, why not? But as something that has shaped contemporary art with a very eminent jury. I mean, I cannot believe it, but it'll be out next month. So again, it was just this, my own very personal agenda that I made. The addressee is very important, because when I try to make these for myself, it's not quite as good. But when it's addressed to a particular person, to a particular travel, it just flies. And that now with this Fiden thing, now I'm convinced even more that it's all right, it's fine to say that the book is my form, and the prints on the wall are really the catalogue of what's in the book. So this is another rendition of the display of Sent a Letter. This is Ladies of Calcutta. I had photographed many ladies in Calcutta, and I decided in 2008 that it was payback time. So I made all these prints, put big frames on them. It was hung like an archive. People in Calcutta came and complained that it's too much work, and how can you show so many photographs, and this is not like a photo show. And then likewise, there were also people who came back 3 or 4 times because you couldn't see it at one go. The point of the show was really this, that in the last week, the ladies would come to the show, they would identify themselves to the receptionist, and they would take their print off the wall and take it home. We didn't even pack it for them. They had to carry the print out onto Park Street and get a taxi or get into their car. And because it had this heavy frame, they were forced to frame it to hang it. Earlier they used to cut my pictures into heart-shaped prints and put them in their frames, which didn't please me. Then others just wouldn't put them up because they were embarrassed to put their own pictures. But now, 108 portraits hang in 66 homes in Calcutta. So they was sent a letter, and this to me seemed like, my God, forever my work is in the family archive. It doesn't matter if I don't have another museum show, another gallery show. I found other ways of putting my work out there. And gradually the images left the walls. Peter Nagy was very happy. There were no shipping costs to come back. And they reduced, and finally there was one left because the lady had passed on and her family had moved away. I brought this into the talk, which is basically about the books, because to me this was continuing that same spirit of the dissemination and the gift. And then there was Blue Book. Okay. So if it's all right with you, I'll just explain 3 projects, and maybe we can do questions on the way to the visual art gallery. Blue Book, my first experiment with color. We've had a great history of color photography in India. I never felt that there was anything more for me to add to that great vocabulary that had been built up. And Raghubir Singh was always a very important reference for me in what not to do in photography, because I think he had done it so brilliantly that there was no point replicating it. And so I always shied away from photography, from color photography. But then I was standing on top of a tower in some factory, and it was late in the evening, and I had run out of black and white film. I happened to have color because I was there on an assignment. So I said, let me shoot with color and let's see what happens. And of course, I can make black and white prints later. But the films came back and they all had this blue cast. And I was almost in tears, and I called Lakshman and I said, what have you done to the film? And then we realized that I was using daylight film. And my colleagues will love this because, I didn't know that after sunset you should use tungsten film. And so I found this blue tonality. And I thought it expressed something more than what was in front of the camera. And I thought, that's the work I want to make. And that also led me to Dream Villa, because I realized this limitation of film, this using color daylight film at night, actually found a language for me that I could not have dreamt about, and we made Dream Villa. And it's all these very highly saturated images made at night with the full moon, but with artificial light, and it had various suggestions in it for me in what it connotated. Won't get into that there. Went back to Gerhard, want to make a Dream Villa book, had the idea to make a big poster book. He said, I don't know why you want to do book and big and justify it to me. We decided we'd make a small book, but how to put these square images. 1 page blank, 1 page image, makes the image too sort of classic, and that I wanted something raw with Dream Villa. And then we put 2 images side by side, full bleed, and that made the images married them forever. And it wasn't about those kind of sequences. So I kept showing things to Gerhard, and he said, Dayanita, this is not us, we can't make a book like this now. I forgot to say with Blue Book, I had wanted to make it like an accordion fold book, because that had worked so well, and I thought, this is it, I found my format. Steidl didn't let me make it as an accordion fold book, because he said, you've done that, we don't repeat it. What is it that you liked about that book? I said, I liked the fact that it was, that it traveled so much. So he said, why don't we make a book of postcards? So we made up this company, Dream Villa Productions, and made a book of postcards. But here, the marketing skills in bookmaking also come in, because we actually made a mistake, so that nobody has ever sent me a postcard from Blue Book, which means nobody has really used it as a book of postcards. It finally just became a book. So we should have sold 2 for the price of 1, so that people could actually send out the postcards. So that failed in the design or marketing aspect of it. Finally, after 5 days and with cameras there making a film on Steidl, I said, I was really fed up, and I took my photographs and I said, all I want is for you to have the image in your hand. Nothing should come between you and the experience of the image, sounding like a condom ad. But that was really what I wanted, that, you know, that's all that there is in your hand, that there's no white space, no two images, just one image. And so I just folded my images, made a dummy, and said, here Gerhard, I made something even you will say no to. He said, we do it. And we have this on camera. So we have a book where the gutter goes through the middle. There are, of course, no page numbers. We've done away with all that by now. And it's tedious to open. You can't even read it at one go. It doesn't lie flat like a coffee table book. So it's really something you have to experience in your hands. So that's Dream Villa, which is sometimes shown as a projection. And this is the new book, House of Love, which is coming out now, book of short stories, exactly the size of an American hardback, the same weight, to suggest to people that maybe it's possible to also read a photograph, read it, and not just look at it. And if one can read a photograph, then can one build a short story? Could one build a photo novel? And that's what this book attempts to do. Really attempts. It's to see if photography can aspire to the condition of literature. I say that very hesitatingly, but that is what I was trying. It's an experiment. So let's see what happens. So it's called House of Love. It has story titles that are very suggestive. Continuous Cities, Departure Lounge, Return to Sender. And occasionally there's a quote or a poem of Vikram Seth. Here it's Avik Sen, In the Night of the Mind, many cities become one. And then there's the story, Continuous Cities. This will be presented on the 16th of December at Nature Mode Gallery. So for all of you who are here at that time, please do come. Sorry, 16th of December. And Continuous Cities also, well, I can talk about that later. And finally, I was asked by Agnes V. and Hans Ulrich to continue a project that they have been doing for many years, where they ask an artist to make something in a tabloid size, anything. It's entirely up to you. So I had just made Dream Villa, and I thought, okay, what can I do with the Dream Villa images? And by now I was convinced that there was nothing more important in photography than to read. That there was just no getting away, at least for the kind of photography I wanted to practice, that there was no getting away from literature. And I decided to make this issue as a tribute to the books that I feel that have shaped me and shaped the work that I do for, I don't know what I've done. But anyway, it's fine to leave it on this also. So then they printed 200,000 copies of this work, and it was distributed free of cost to different museums. It's been sent to some institutions in India as well, and it was distributed at the Art Summit one evening. People will sometimes just use it for sitting on. When I was handing it out to people at the Art Summit, some people didn't take it because they thought it was a new Domino's something, or some marketing ploy was being done. So that's it. Thank you very much. And now